Planning, this is Anne.
All right. Oh, great. Get the recording going. So Johnson County doesn't have any data centers, so that's sort of our starting baseline. And I guess we can just kick off that. But before I begin, I would be remiss if I didn't note that what I'm about to say is a building off of Johnson County's efforts to draft a data center ordinance, a process that's been nearly a year and that is still not complete for us. The PDS office, and particularly my colleague Becky Soglin, did a lot of work researching the issue and presenting before the Board of Supervisors in December. And if you want to really deep dive into baseline information on data centers and kind of benefits and impacts that you might expect, if you want to take an hour, hour and a half and watch Becky's presentation, I would recommend that. But just generally, we're looking at what's the data center, potential benefits, potential harms, how to permit or maybe not to permit, and then what Johnson County specifically is considering for next steps. So, what is a data center? We're looking at the old version of data centers being cloud computing storage, whereas new versions of this are these AI research and computational resource centers that you hear about. You hear about, these chat GPT centers, about Meta, about Google, et cetera, et cetera. And we're a lot of different sizes we're thinking of here. You've got your really small, your micro ones, all the way up to your hyperscalers. And the hyperscalers are those names that would be more familiar to you. But there's also this concept here of thinking of primary versus ancillary data centers, where primary, again, those big ones, that's the primary use on the property, with ancillary being the secondary use of a location that's more of an add-on for resource generation and, lower output, lower demands, things that you could co-locate along with a substation and kind of siphoning off some of that existing capacity. So thinking of your potential benefits for data centers, thinking of you got your tax base, your jobs, your community benefit agreements, and then also use of existing excess infrastructure capacity. So taxes are pretty straightforward. You got property and sales tax opportunities, a little bit less straightforward if we're talking about TIF rebates and everything like that. But as two examples, and this was provided to us through a little bit of discussion with our county's assessor's office, Warren County and Des Moines, West Des Moines, both saw millions of dollars per year in property tax opportunities with the large scale hyperscaler data centers they have in their locations. So potential opportunity for your community. Jobs that get split between immediate jobs in your construction operations and then your ongoing jobs for your operations itself. And it's a little bit hard to see specific numbers for centers. Maybe Cedar Rapids can opine a little bit more about what they're seeing on the ground. But national trends are 10 to 30 to 1 for construction versus operational jobs. And I will say that it may seem a little bit transient for the construction, but construction is still like a 5, 6 year long period. So that's not an insignificant time for there to be a lot of construction jobs in your area. Community benefit agreements, those are individually negotiated agreements for each of your projects, which are primarily going to be context specific and can include things like workforce development, environmental mitigation, or just general environmental enhancement programs, infrastructure programs, or housing, or just general community betterment funds that your community may be able to take advantage of. And then there's this other item thinking of maximizing the capacity of your existing infrastructure. Data centers require a lot of resources, and there may be sufficient capacity within your existing network to supply those resources to the data centers and thereby spreading out those fixed costs across a wider range base and that will theoretically lower costs in the long run for everyone that's on it. And that's typically how data centers operated in the 90s and the 2000s by soaking up that excess capacity. But a big question now is, does that still hold true today? And are data centers driving new capacity, new load that then there comes the question of who's going to pay for that load? So deleterious impacts, you're looking at your water use, your land use, noise, construction impacts, waste management, compatibility with your adjacent uses. So thinking about the big topic du jour really is water use. So for enterprise centers, that's at 5,000 to 50,000 square foot location. You can have an equivalency of hospital or two 18-hole golf courses for annual water use. But hyperscalers can use billions of gallons annually, water resources that could be equivalent to a 50,000 resident town. An example we saw here in Iowa was Counter Bluffs using 1.3 billion gallons in 2024. And a lot of the water use is not necessarily for the people that are in the building, but it's for a lot of the cooling systems that they use. And there are different cooling systems that are available, but nothing is free here. And if you have a system that uses less water to cool their equipment, that probably means they're using more power and there may be more noise here as well. As a side note for water use, I'd like to flag everyone that a Iowa House bill was just introduced related to water conservation. And speaking of using non-potable water for cooling, so keep an eye on HF 2001. So power use. There's a large requirement for power for operations, enterprise scale systems needing 10 to 50 megawatts, while hyperscales can get up to 500 to 1 gigawatt. In some places in the United States, you've seen up to a 25% load increase in some areas, which may not be able to be met, may be not built out at all. There's a large question as well as when we get beyond the filling in existing excess capacity, who's going to pay for the new generation? Who's going to pay for the new transmission and delivery infrastructure? And that can vary widely by utility. The different utility models having managed this in different ways. There's also the idea of on-site power for backup or to bridge a gap between what's available to the data center versus just porting everything in from the larger grid. Currently, right now, on-site generation as a bridge is possible, backup as a bridge is possible, but completely islanding the site at this time is considered infeasible. So, you can't necessarily have this its own isolated data center without any sort of hookup to the wider electrical grid. At least it's assumed that that's not possible. Your on-site generation mix can be a mixture of renewables, it can be fossil, it can be battery, it can even be small modular nuclear reactors if they ever get up and spinning. But you want to be careful because, it's possible there that fossil fuel generation could be part of that mix, and that could be really environmentally hazardous. It could be really loud, and it's something to take into mind for consideration. Now, noise comes in different kind of flavors. You got your typical dBA, but then there's also dBc, which you can think of more like humming coming from a center. And those are things that you would certainly be mindful of or want to be mindful of as you write regulations. And then, you got your general construction impacts. It's a large site, it's a large building. You've got heavy machinery occupying your road network. You've got adjacent laydown yards. There's going to be traffic impacts. There's going to be noise nuisances. There's going to be visual impositions not dissimilar from large construction projects or that you'd already be considering in your community. You know, you've got compatibility concerns, which Johnson County and any planner really is concerned about. You're looking at, what do you have for commercial districts, your agricultural districts, industrial districts, residential? Where does it necessarily fit? These are not going to be high traffic generating uses. From the outside, they're going to look a lot like large warehouses, but you've got noise, you've got resource draw. There might be heat plumes, which is especially important if you're near an airport. So it's one of the things you want to balance when you're thinking of potential siting of places like this. And then waste management for these centers. Data centers are very hard on their equipment. They cycle through their GPUs very quickly. And so you do want to make sure that um, there's not ill management e-waste ending up in your landfill. And then sort of the meat and potatoes of planning is, what's the appropriateness of this use? Does your community even want to consider permitting or allowing this in your community? Do you have underlying support to enable or to prohibit a use like this in your community? Think of your comp plans, your strategic plans, your economic development plans. Where can you find support or for the actions that you're going to want to take? And if you have that, what kind of mechanism do you want to get this to be in your community? Do you want this by right? Do you want this to require a board of supervisors or a city council approval for every project? Do you want it to go to an appointed board? Again, going back to thinking of your appropriateness, what zoning district is the best fit to balance your community's needs and then mitigate the impacts of a data center to your capacity or to your community, excuse me. And then also regulatory capacity. Do you have the capacity in your office to implement the regulations you want to write? Could you hire on someone for some of the more technical aspects of what you're considering? So these are just generally the large kind of picture items for data centers, and narrowing it down a little bit to Johnson County. It's a bit of a lead in here. So staff drafted an initial ordinance over the spring of last year and the summer, and we presented something to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the board of supervisors in the fall. We thought we had done some solid work, but we hadn't necessarily spoken enough with our board in advance, and they rejected it. They wanted it more. They wanted more consultation. They wanted more information. And in the process of doing so, they decided that a 1 year moratorium was an appropriate mechanism to give the staff and give the board additional time for research work, additional time for drafting and for consultation. So staff did some additional research and presented some background information at a work session in December. That's the session that I suggested you all kind of check out if you got some time. We got some pretty clear feedback from our board about what they expect to see or what they hope to see in new ordinances. And then, we'll take that back, take it on board, and I get to sharpen my quill and write a new ordinance that we should expect to bring back before the board sometimes in the summer. So their focuses really kind of came back to the idea of an appropriate location for these data centers so that they do or do not have, manageable impacts on the community. Thinking of sort of the existing resource capacity within our community, thinking of the resource intensity of these uses, what kind of impacts are that going to have on our existing users? And is there an ability for us to reasonably enforce the regulations that we have written so we're not overburdening ourselves or relying too much on the word of a interested outside party here. So it's a bit of a recap for my section of this, just think about if this is a use that your community wishes to encourage or discourage, and I would suggest consulting with your board of supervisors and your planning and zoning commission members or your city council, as it were. Maybe you want to consider passing an initial moratorium or have a really strict limit of the use being to one zoning district while you're drafting regulations. Remember, if you're doing a moratorium, you have to have a very clear end date for it. I would suggest looking to existing planning documents within your community for guidance or justification on how you're going to tee up your ordinance. Definitely consult with your neighbors to reuse existing code language so you don't have to recreate the wheel. And then if you feel as if you're in place, get your public hearings together and secure passage of your ordinance. That's it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing here.
Okay. Okay. So thanks, Joe. That was really helpful in terms of a intro into data centers. So how Davenport started talking about data centers is very different. We had a project come to us. So it came through a request for information from our Chamber of Commerce. And they were utilizing a site selector. Entity was confidential and we were under a non-disclosure agreement, and we still are actually. So I can't fully disclose everything, but I can touch on what is public. So we knew at the time that it was a data center. We knew that they were looking for 300 acres. They had specific questions about access to sanitary sewer, and it was a high energy user. The map on the right is the land that they were looking at. They have actually purchased more than that. We can get in that later. It's in our Eastern Iowa Industrial Center on the north side of the city. So a little bit about the information that was pushed out from our economic development team as part of that. Overall, the request was for 328 acres. It's currently ag land, although it is zoned light industrial. The overall valuation of that land was just under $1 million, taxes to the city, $31,000 annually. total taxes, 31,000, taxes to the cities, just over 14,000. So with the proposed investment, obviously that goes up substantially. To Joe's point, there are construction jobs associated with it that end up being quite a bit higher, and the construction lasts quite a long time. However, with the projects that we have here in Davenport, they were willing to, in their incentives package, guarantee 50 new jobs. I do know from speaking with our economic development team that those are the jobs that are directly associated with the company. There would be ancillary jobs as well. They're just not ones that would be subject to counts through their incentive package. And then $5 million value for those new jobs. Another infographic, our economic development teams had a pretty good success in how they're communicating TIF-like deals. So this came through as high quality jobs. So the proposal would be to do a 60% rebate, but the community would still retain 40% of the taxes associated with that increase in value. So as you can see, this is how it was communicated out. So everybody's still a winner in this case. So all of the taxing bodies still do get increased revenue from the project over that 20-year period. So data centers weren't in the City of Davenport's zoning code. And so they approached me as the planner on, hey, where can this go? I don't know if this is something else in everybody else's code, but the City of Davenport does have a process for a zoning interpretation, and that's what they chose to utilize. So it outlines the general process and kind of what authority there is. So it has to be initiated by City Council, P&Z, Zoning Board of Adjustment, or property owner, and it needs to further actual development. And so that's just straight from the code section on what is in the city's code. And then for anybody's benefit, this was the definition that was given to me that they wanted me to consider in interpreting where a data center is appropriate. I did the highlighting and bolding for you, and it will make sense a little bit later. So it's to house, operate, and maintain, and replace networked computer systems and data and transaction processing equipment. And then primarily to provide as a service to persons other than the company operating the data center, or outsource information technology and computer equipment. So the City of Davenport has several different uses in the zoning code that I did take a look at with this interpretation. So we do have a definition for a warehouse, which is a fairly straightforward definition: storage and distribution of manufactured products, supplies, and/or equipment. Wholesale establishment, so business to business sales, basically. And then just a light industrial, which is research and development, manufacturing, fabrication, processing, and reduction and/or destruction of materials. And then some other items of note based off of things that were in that definition. We handle mechanical equipment and generators as accessory uses, and we do regulate those in different ways, not through the principal use itself. And then we do have a code section that the zoning ordinance in its entirety does not apply to public utilities. So anything referencing the substations, they call them private substations, and that might be the agreement, but the equipment is owned by the utility company and therefore exempt from the zoning code. So where this ended up going is it is interpreted to fall under the use of a warehouse and therefore is allowed in the I-1 light industrial zoning district. shout out to Altoona. That's part of their extremely large data center campus over there. Where we're at right now, so May 2024 is when council approved participation in a program called High Quality Jobs with that 60% property tax exemption over 20 years. After that, company has acquired the land. We do regularly meet with the company. They signed their contract with the state for that high quality jobs. But please note, the state has sunset that program for their incentives. So it will be kind of interesting to see, there's a timeline in their contract when the jobs need to be created. I believe it's 5 years. So it will be interesting to see if they are able to meet those timelines. Negotiations are ongoing for the actual development agreement. So this is not done at the council level. We will have to take a development agreement to city council, as well as I know that the company is also working with the water company and energy company. So just a few final thoughts. If you don't want to do it the way I did it, I totally get it and understand. It's kind of an interesting situation to be in. Be proactive in your community in addressing data center uses. They're not going away. We're using more and more AI in our lives. Some people don't even realize they're doing it. So is there the political will to support these or not? Is there the public support for them? Understand the resource demands in your jurisdiction and what these require, and including what your capacity is for the specific lines. I've learned a lot about that. It's not just what's available at your sanitary, water pollution control plant. It's the specific line that they're on and the rate that they're releasing water into your sanitary system. So talk through, can you handle that extra capacity? And if the answer is no, maybe you're not set up for data centers, and maybe that's just a simple thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be use related. There's other mechanisms outside of zoning that can limit data centers. Not all of them, but definitely the larger ones. And even amongst the last 2 years of conversations with this company, technology in it is changing very quickly, as well as their models for their data halls and the amount of water for cooling their equipment, as well as their other utility needs. So make sure when you are addressing data centers in your code, do you have what you need to adjust to a changing technology, especially at the pace that it is undergoing changes? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Michael. I'm the Director of Economic and Development Services for the City of Cedar Rapids. And I'm not going to get my presentation. Is that? Let's see here. All right. Laura or Joe can tell me if
we can see you.
That's
yes.
Working. Fantastic. So I'm going to start out talking a little bit about zoning and then incentives, and then I'm going to move through that pretty quickly because I want to get to what we've actually experienced as the two data center companies here in Cedar Rapids have started the construction process on their campuses. So we have two data center campuses going up here in Cedar Rapids. One is Google. The other is a company called QTS. Excuse me. Joe mentioned earlier, hyperscalers. That is the size of these campuses. So in total, it's somewhere around 850 acres, approximately 14 data center buildings between the two. and Google, hyperscaler for their own AI primarily, and QTS has a bit of a different model. They build the buildings, the cooling infrastructure, the racks, and then they rent out space for you to plug your own, servers into. However, it does appear like they have a single client for the entirety of their campus in Cedar Rapids. And it's similar to Laura. We're under an NDA, but it's a household name that certainly everyone would recognize. So we did have a zoning code in our zoning code, a classification that included data centers, manufacturing, assembly, processing, and technology. Three sub-classification options within that. Limited was where it fits, defining characteristics there, need for specialized utility infrastructure to accommodate the use, and there's no hazardous chemicals, explosives, etc. Data centers are allowed by conditional use permit in mixed use districts, and that's primarily what you see here. There are size limitations associated with the buildings in those districts. So you couldn't have, the hyperscale sized. The first two buildings going up on Google's campus are 1.25 million square feet each, which is about, 27 acres roughly under roof. So these are enormous. And then they're permitted in more intensive districts, some of the mixed use, and all the way up to industrial, which is where they are located. We have development agreements with both companies. The thing I will mention is that at the outset of our negotiations, and even after the development agreements were approved, the companies were lowballing all of the numbers. And I don't mean for that to sound negative, but jobs, investment, all significantly lower than what it's actually turning out to be. And that's because they don't want to commit to anything over what is absolutely necessary in a development agreement, as things can change pretty quickly. So Google, $576 million capital investment for each data center. It's turning out to be significantly higher than that. We did have some construction timeline on their development agreement. However, they are really moving quickly. They started out with a 10-year construction timeline. They've shaved that down to as quick as they can put these up. And, again, the employment creation of at least 31 full-time jobs. That was the minimum necessary to participate in the state's high quality jobs program. That program, of course, doesn't exist any longer. But even if it did, the governor's office and IEDA told us that even if it did exist, they would not approve the use of it for data centers any longer. So, and then we did a 70% tax exemption through high quality jobs. We also rebated some of the franchise fees collected by the city through the electrical provider, which is Alliant over here. And then we also negotiated a community betterment fund. This is the first time we had done this. For each data center, Google will make an annual payment of $400,000 per data center for 15 years, up to a cap of $36 million. And that goes straight into the general fund. Lynn County is currently in some negotiations, and I think generally speaking, we are in the driver's seat in local government more so than we were when we started negotiating 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's become pretty apparent that they need to move quickly. The amount of land that also has available power and water is diminishing quickly around the country. And, I think, as I mentioned, local governments are in a much better position to negotiate lower incentives, hire community betterment type funds because they need us more than we need them at this point. And that has changed pretty quickly within the course of 3 or 4 years. We also did a gray water discharge credit to try and encourage them to avoid sending quite as much to the wastewater treatment plant. Pretty similar deal for QTS, higher initial capital investment per data center, and again, all the same, kind of low numbers of jobs that they committed to, and we were not able to use the high quality jobs program, so we ended up doing a tax rebate instead. Not quite as good of a deal for the company, but still looks pretty similar. We again negotiated that community betterment fund. Lynn County, I think, is going to negotiate a better deal, even yet, which is a good thing. And so I do want to talk about some of the realities that we have seen as these have started to go up. And I've broken these down into community challenges and tensions, and then some of the benefits on the next slide. So obviously, use of water and power resources is something that is getting a lot of attention, a lot of questions. We have a lot of heavy water users in Cedar Rapids because of existing industry. So we're familiar with high demand for water. Google actually is not our largest water user. It's still ADM. So this is something that we've had some experience in, and that's something we've been able to lean on. You hear a lot about water rates. And I don't know how it operates in other communities. In Cedar Rapids, we're actually able to spread out the cost across a lot of our industrial users. And, the addition of Google really has created a situation in which we're able to keep rates, lower than otherwise because of the economies of scale of, the industry here in Cedar Rapids creates. I don't necessarily think that is the case everywhere, however. So so impact on power rates, Alliant would have to speak on that. What I can say is they did negotiate a special rate through the Iowa Utilities Commission. And as a part of that special rate case, they did commit to not raising rates for 5 years. So when the individual that is selling solar panels comes to my house and says, "Hey, you're seeing your price rise already because of the data centers," that is not true yet. I'm not saying it won't be, but for the next 5 years anyway, that is not the case. Evaporative versus mechanical cooling. Joe mentioned this in his spot. The trade-off for using less water is more power. The evaporative cooling does create some plumes that could have impacts in the winter under certain condition on nearby roads, depending on how far that plume travels, what the temperature is, et cetera, et cetera. So something to consider. The mechanical cooling, particularly near regulated airspace, as Joe also mentioned, is extremely important. QTS uses a closed loop system, which essentially acts like a giant radiator. Google, however, did have to do a lot of work with the FAA, submit a plume study, get a determination of hazard, work with the airport director and board to come to an agreement on what was acceptable. So it doesn't close down our airport under certain weather conditions, which is primarily only an issue in the winter, but it is a significant issue. So if you're dealing with regulated airspace, start those conversations early. The ratio of land to jobs, or ratio of incentives to jobs, ratio of resources to jobs, these are all things that we get questions about pretty regularly. Again, the number of jobs that you often see in the news are the minimum that these companies need to commit to to get the incentive packages. What we're realizing as these things have gotten moving is that the short-term number of construction jobs, so QTS and Google both have, depending on the season and stage of construction, anywhere between 1,500 and 3,000 tradespeople on site per campus. So you're looking at anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 in Cedar Rapids of tradespeople. We have people in from all over the country. It is putting pressure on our housing system. It is putting upward pressure on rents. It's putting upward pressure on things like suppliers, on prices for any number of materials, labor wages. They're paying, in some cases, double what the going market rate is. And so that's putting upward pressure on wages, which is, of course, great for labor unions and tradespeople. However, it is making it difficult for local companies sometimes to find people. I just heard from a company that makes plastic molds here in town that they're having trouble getting some materials. It's causing some issues with the supply lines, and so unexpected things like that have come up. But in terms of long-term jobs, they are going to be in the hundreds as opposed to the tens. Roughly probably 100 people per data center, high wage, high skill positions. So that was a nice surprise. These companies are not always forthcoming with a lot of information, but things have shaken out on the positive end thus far. Transportation impacts that Joe mentioned, those are very real. The amount of construction traffic is significant. We have had to put a new hard surface on one of the roads down there, and between the two data center companies, they just paid for it. If you ask, a lot of the times, these folks, depending on which company it is, have access to a lot of capital, and they're willing to spend it if it's an identified need. We've had good luck with that. So they completely repaved 76th Avenue Southwest here in Cedar Rapids. And that's about a 5-mile stretch. So whatever that comes to. Also, get road use agreements in place. Some of the roads that are being used for construction are in unincorporated Lynn County, and they did have to threaten some embargoes to get those road use agreements in place. So start thinking about that earlier. I mentioned regulated airspace already. Serious issue to pay attention to. Communication with neighboring local governments, very important. There was a bit of a failure on that in Cedar Rapids in communication with City of Fairfax, Lynn County. Wish we would have started those earlier. A number of things would have went a bit smoother. In addition to the impacts that Laura was talking about on the wastewater treatment system, they're putting in a significant amount of new infrastructure, including sanitary sewer. They have to flush these with essentially sanitize them and keep running things through there so you don't end up with Legionnaire's disease and some of the other issues with pipes. And they do, when they first install those, run a significant amount of biocide through those. And they called us on a Tuesday and said, we want to do it Wednesday. Well, we had to slow them way down because we had to do a calculation because, that kills the bugs in the pipes. It also kills the bugs that run our water treatment facility. And so we had to figure out how long does our system need to recover? What impact is it going to have? And so understanding where that is in their construction schedule is pretty important as well. Permitting issues, we've not had too many of those. What I will say is that it has gotten close to overwhelming our building inspectors. The plans reviewers kept up pretty well. The building inspection staff, they're out there pretty consistently daily. And finally, it got to a point where we had to work a deal with both QTS and Google for them to hire third-party inspectors at their expense because it was simply overwhelming our system, and we didn't want to hire additional people for a 2-year term or something like that. Which again, they were more than happy to do. That's really been our experience. Every time we ask them for something, they're willing to do it. They do have a lot of subcontractors. Some of them are from out of town, failed to pull permits. In that really exacerbated some of the questions about water here in Cedar Rapids, if you followed any of that in the news. And then this also has created the need for additional power generation. Alliant is in the process of trying to site another gas-fired baseload power plant. That's created some tension in the community about where that's going to go. Of course, Nextera is likely to bring Dwayne Arnold back online. I saw Tom Treherne on here. Hey, Tom. I'm sure he could talk way more about that, but that is something that is happening as well for one of the companies, and likely to see more development of data centers around that. Kind of on the more positive side, economic impact and partnership. Both of these companies have provided significant support for local nonprofit organizations, hundreds of thousands of dollars just in the first year for a wide range. They've built any number of houses through Habitat for Humanity, and really have been happy with the amount of engagement and support that they've given the nonprofits. As I mentioned, they were very willing to address the transportation impacts. The QTS's use of mechanical cooling really cuts down on the amount of water necessary. And they are willing to do a high level of communication, particularly during the permitting and construction process. We set up weekly check-ins with each of these construction teams, and that's really worked out well. The use of local labor, contractors, and suppliers has been absolutely fantastic. And they've really made an effort to use as much local as they can. I mentioned the third-party inspectors. Building permit fees alone are now approaching, I think, $8 to $9 million. That's not valuation; that's actual permit fees, which has been extremely helpful in today's budget climate. Significant property tax, as Laura already mentioned, and the community betterment funds. So if you end up with one of these in your community, or one looking in your community, push pretty hard for that community betterment fund. The construction jobs are significant, and then the permanent jobs much higher than we had anticipated. So on the left is a rendering of what the QTS campus likely will look like in the end. This is a finished product from Denver. Everywhere they go, they try to put a local flavor on a mural in the front, and then this is just a photo of one of the Google buildings under construction. So I will stop there and hand it back over to Anne.
Thank you all.
Sorry, that was my fault. I was trying to mute myself.
Okay, we're recording again. Very good. Thank you all. This has been really interesting. Let's open it up for questions. Can put it in the chat. Feel free to come off mute. Show us your face if you want to just have more of a conversation. Who has questions for Joe, Bill, and Laura?
We were that comprehensive. Oh, there we go.
Go ahead, Joshua.
So I'm in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and we've had quite a few data centers either sited or are being discussed right now in our region. There's one nearby. I think they're looking at 1,500 acres. It's a $10 billion project, which may or may not happen. But so we're trying to get ahead of this on trying to adopt an ordinance before we get a serious inquiry. one of the things that we're trying to get caught up on in our policies and procedures, zoning included, but others as well, is the adequate public facilities types of ordinances. We do have a municipal utility, power utility, which is not typical. So I'm wondering if any of you can talk about that part of the regulation that is not zoning specifically, but one of those other things that you can use to extract those community benefits agreements or other ways to make sure that they're paying their way.
Yeah, so we have bumped up against our water capacity in Cedar Rapids as a result of the addition of these, and so we have started conversations with them about chipping in for adding on to the water treatment facility and water delivery. Anyone new that were to show up, obviously they would have to participate as well. Have those conversations early and upfront. We did put a cap in our development agreement with Google in particular. QTS, they're actually going to fill their system once, and then, of course, they're going to have to recharge it occasionally, but they're going to use more water from toilets than they are with cooling. Google is exactly the opposite. We put a cap on how much we committed to deliver to them. And I think that, they are in such a hurry at this point that, if they're approaching you and it's one of the larger companies, I think.
Oops. Looks like Bill
Yeah, Bill's gone.
froze.
Okay. I might jump in just real quick.
Oh,
you're back.
Oh,
Bill, you froze there for a minute. I think you were about to say they might be willing to contribute to
sure.
improving your water treatment plant.
Yeah, the bottom line is don't be afraid to immediately start having that conversation about water capacity. And if you need them to chip in to expand water capacity, I've been really surprised at what they've been willing to do because they are in such a hurry. So, I think immediately having that conversation and working it into the development agreement is one viable path.
Sorry, if I can just
have too much more to add. Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Well, I was just going to ask, is the reason that you've been able to get this community betterment fund, they've contributing to the roads and maybe even water, is because of the city, you need the development agreement in order to do that, right? So it almost seems like the city, without that, would they still be chipping in like that?
So the road issue, they spent however many millions of dollars paving that road. That was not in the development agreement. It became a serious issue because of the amount of truck traffic. They're also replacing a bridge that the trucks are beating up. That was a secondary roads bridge that got annexed into the city. All that has happened outside of the development agreement, just on a verbal request.
Is the community betterment fund portion, Bill, in the development agreement?
It is, yes.
And so maybe for Joshua, if there is a development agreement incorporating the concerns regarding adequate public facilities in that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a route to go. And again, I wouldn't hesitate to try and push them a little bit to, chip in for additional water capacity or whatever it is. And I realize that's tens of millions of dollars, but it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Thanks. Go ahead, Laura.
The only thing I would have to add, I mean, obviously we don't have one yet, but there are always conversations had. They'll ask you for things, just say no, push back. It's okay. They're obviously out to do what's financially best for them, but they do have a lot of capital to work with, as Bill mentioned. And I think our conversations are very positive with the company that we're working with. And so, again, I think in some respect, they're looking for investment that has longevity. They're looking for good community partners that are going to be honest and open with what their concerns are and what your limits are. So as long as you're communicating that, I think that you can get to a good place. Now, in terms of actual regulations, City of Davenport doesn't have franchise fees. All we have is our sewer fee, because water is private. It's with Iowa American Water Company, and then we have Mid-American Energy as our utility user. So we don't have ways to extract things that way. I'm not entirely sure if there's been conversations about a community betterment fund, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that's been discussed.
Google and QTS are both hyper aware of the national conversation about data centers. There's been some local backlash, and they truly are trying to be good community, corporate citizens, community partners. I think that just like Laura said, speak up and ask for what you want. You might be surprised.
And going outside of the ask, because definitely ask, one of the things that Johnson County was considering as part of our initial draft of regulations was around writing in to have a certification from, in this particular instance, the power provider, that they could manage and accommodate the power draw that they were requesting, and having that as be a baseline condition and expectation of our ordinance. So it's not as if a load that they were going to bring on was going to overwhelm the system that was unprepared for them. The developer had to show us, at least that's what we proposed, they had to show us that their draw could be met. But I do want to caveat that with some places have decided that if their local power needs cannot be met, they'll bring their own power with them because they're in such a rush to get turned on. And that's where you need to worry and be concerned that the power that they are bringing on site, that they're providing, is one that's acceptable to your community. I think it was in Louisville where X has got a data center where they're firing a big gas turbine to bridge the gap between what the local utility has for them and what they need. And that's causing a lot of problems in their community. So
Joe,
be
we're being
mindful of
told,
that.
sorry, we're being told that we may need to start considering a modular nuclear ordinance
Yeah.
sooner than later. That's coming. I know they've been talking about it for years, but it sounds like that's on the horizon anyway.
And one thing that I also want to stress that we have learned as part of our research in Johnson County, people will talk about having efficient data centers. They'll be efficient on water use. They'll be efficient on power use. Efficiency does not mean that they're not drawing large amounts of power and water, just that they're efficient with its use. So you can have a huge draw and they can still be very efficient according to industry standards. So, just keep that in mind too. Efficiency does not mean low amounts.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for your question, Joshua. Anyone else?
Hi, John Robbins, North Iowa Area Council of Governments. This is a little bit oriented maybe towards Joe there, but maybe the others can chime in. Joe, you had kind of talked about the different sizes of data centers. A lot of these small counties or cities are getting some pressure from crypto mining facilities and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what I'm asking, but what kind of different requirements are you looking at for smaller facilities versus larger facilities, those kind of things?
Well, there's a little bit of a difference here in that we originally had drafted our data center ordinance with the idea of crypto centers as the primary problem that we were going to address. And then we expanded it to be these larger data centers. And then frankly, in conversations with our board, a lot of the conversation focused on those much larger centers. So we're still trying to figure out whether we can make one ordinance that will address both the really micro all the way up to the hyperscale. And it's not going to necessarily be easy, but I think that there's a lot of cross coverage that you can do. I think that the water may be less of a concern, but you're still going to talk about power draw. You're still going to be talking about noise concerns, especially if those smaller facilities are using a bunch of AC coolers to run everything. Burn zones around the facilities in case they catch on fire, like what happened outside of Grundy. A lot of similar kind of things like that. So think about the impact you're going to have on your neighbors for even those smaller facilities. Did that address your question?
I think so. I'm talking with a small county in our area, we're trying to address them because they're all over our service area. We're kind of starting to hear about it, so we're trying to keep up.
Yeah. And the ancillary one that I mentioned is also an interesting one. If like Mid-Am or whomever decides they're going to drop a small little minor right where they have a substation, that's going to be hard for us to regulate.
Thanks.
We probably got time for one more question if anyone has one out there. Not seeing anything. I just wanted to note that Becky Soglin with Johnson County put some resources in the chat that Joe referred to in his presentation. Thank you for doing that. Tyler Beswick with the City of Bettendorf put together that bill that Joe also mentioned regarding data centers and water. So thanks for that, Taylor. And thank you to our speakers. Thank you for everyone who joined us. I feel like we need data centers version 2 maybe in a couple of years and see where we're all at. But yeah, I do, before you all leave, I have just a couple quick updates about APA Iowa's third Thursday. This is the first one of 2026. In February, we're going to be joined by Stephen Van Steenhouse. He is APA Iowa's legislative chair and APA Iowa's lobbyist, Tom Cope, to give us an update on the legislative session. There will be no session in March because of spring break. And then in April, we're going to have Jeff Wiggins with the City of Des Moines. This will be April 16th to share some successes that they've had with the city's bike bus program for getting kids to school. So please put those on your calendar. We'll be sending out updates on Friday with more information on those. And lastly, we have a very brief survey that my colleague put together, Sarah Gardner, to just see what other topics you all want to hear about. I know we sent out a survey later in 2025. We didn't get much feedback. We did get, Kirk, I see you're on the call. Thank you for suggesting data centers. And it's very short. Please fill it out. And we'll send this out in the Friday update tomorrow, probably tomorrow or maybe next week too, but it'll only take a minute or two. We just want to know what other topics, what other planning topics do people want to hear about, and we can hopefully organize some sessions. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to our speakers, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
That was fun. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.